Hello, welcome back to my Advent alphabet of self-care. And today we've reached Q and I've chosen the subject of quiet. Now, it's interesting, there's been a lot said about the word quiet in the last few years. Somebody has published a book called Quiet, and that's about introverts. And it's about how it's okay to be an introvert, that introverts do need a lot of quiet in their lives and that they need that in order to replenish themselves. There's also another book that's coming out that's all about quiet, that's written by Fern Cotton, and her version of quiet is about silencing the inner critic, and I think that's a really good subject. Now, the inner critic is that voice inside us that tells us that we're no good, that tells us that we're bad at something, or that we're a fraud or an imposter. Who do we think we are? You know, if we make a mistake, the inner critic just wades in there and says, well, isn't that typical of you? You know, you're always someone who makes a mistake. You know, you just can't be trusted. If we're worried about something, the inner critic, well, you know, you're not capable of coping with this. You know, it's going to be really bad, and, you know, bad things are going to happen because that's just what happens to you. So that's the sort of voice of the inner critic. And it's actually really upsetting to us, and it can make us feel quite down. It makes us feel quite down about ourselves. And we've often internalised perhaps critical voices from the past, perhaps a critical parent or bullies at school, you know, and we've carried the voice of the inner critic ever since. Sometimes people say there's more than one inner critic, and you know, it can be different people in your lives. But basically, what we've tried to do, and it's a very sort of clever strategy in a way, in order to keep ourselves safe and to keep ourselves safe from the voices of criticism that are outside us, is we try and sort of criticise ourselves. So that means that other people won't criticise us, and this is partly where perfectionism comes from. So what can we do? How can we quiet that voice of the inner critic? I think number one is about recognising that there is an inner critic there. And you can often recognise when the inner critic's getting going. If you're not aware of what it's saying, you can usually tell by the feelings that are in your body. So if you start feeling really sad or really down, or you're feeling really worried, that's maybe a sign that the inner critic is having a field day in your head. And it's really helpful if you can take a step back and just see what those words actually are. Some people find it helpful to sort of sit down and journal and to sort of think about what that voice is saying. Because if you can recognise that it is like a critical voice in your head, that gives you a little bit of space away from it. And so rather than thinking, oh God, I'm such a bad person, you can think to yourself, I'm having the thought, oh God, I'm such a bad person. And that just helps to create a little bit of space between the thought and you as a person. And you can see that you're a person who's having that thought, but that is not the entirety of you. It's part of you. It's the critical part of you who's giving you that thought. And mindfulness is really helpful in helping us to identify when these thoughts are happening. If you're able to identify the thought, you can then begin to challenge it. And often the inner critic is a real all or nothing, black or white thinker. So, you know, it'll say things like, you always get things wrong. You can't be trusted. You're hopeless. And, you know, if you heard a friend saying that to you, what would be your response? You'd probably try and reassure your friend, and you'd probably say to them, no, you're not hopeless. Look at all the things you've done that are really good and really helpful. That's just an example of what you might say. But, you know, you would start picking out exceptions to that all or nothing thinking. You'd find exceptions to the rule. And this is one way that we can actually approach our inner critic. You know, we can almost say, well, you know, thank you. I'm aware that you're trying to keep me safe, but actually, you know, I think you'll find that, yeah, I may have made a mistake on this occasion, but I can learn from that. I'm quite good at reflecting on my mistakes, so I can take that away and think about it. I can make some changes, and I don't just make mistakes, I do all this other stuff as well. And you can begin to actually look after yourself a little bit better. So that's how you might be able to use quiet. So you might notice, if you are quiet, that these thoughts come up for you. And if they do, don't be frightened of them. See if you can have almost an internal conversation with them and recognise that they are not all of you. And in that way, you may be able to quiet your inner critic. Thanks for watching, and bye for now.